This is Critical Nonsense, our high-lowbrow show about culture, science, and tech. This week, Joey asks me about bottling up our thoughts.
Woo!
Devotion. This is what a Joey sounds like. And this is what an executive producer and EDM backup singer Jess Vander sounds like.
Hi, this is Jess.
I don't even know. It's not an EDM song. It's just this Steph on our team's sister was on a song and she shared it with us. And I liked it. And then I showed it to Emerson and Emerson really liked it. Steph.
I was like, not Dorothy?
Not Dorothy.
Like, there are multiple siblings, musicians. Wow. Today I learned.
The number of talented individuals and siblings within our company is high. But Emerson really likes the song.
Okay.
And it came on just a random playlist when we were riding in this morning and I turned it off and she just kept singing all the words. I was like, how do you know all of the words to this song?
It's like, hold, this is my jam.
Yeah. Jess, our house is clean.
Great.
I wanted to speak with you about something.
Okay. Forgetting. Okay.
Do you remember?
Nope.
Well, you're doing great already.
Cool.
I came across someone talking about a study recently in a tweet in a sheet, an X-eat. I don't. Yeah. It's still
cells.
Twitter. It'll always be Twitter.
Digital cells.
They shared in this study, suppression of unwanted thoughts improved mental health. This goes against the centuries-old wisdom, don't bottle up your emotions. And this study that appeared in Science Advances, science.org, was called Improving Mental Health by Training the Suppression of Unwanted Thoughts. I just thought it was super fascinating in sort of the way broadly that conversations in culture have gone. You know, we've talked at different points about the idea of, therapy speak expanding within culture, or, jokes and memes that people make of like, men will literally do X before they go to therapy instead of going to therapy, or like ideas like that. But this new study is demonstrating like, actually, if you can just force yourself to not think about the things that are bothering you, turns out it's super effective.
Wow, what if you just didn't?
And so my question for you, Jess, is how should we start bottling things up?
Well, that actually is my first question, which is, what does it say about what the suppressing of the thoughts looks like? Because I could imagine there's one version where it's just not telling people, but then there's another where it's just distract thyself. Don't think about it. Which one?
I think it is probably in creating behaviors. If you are already someone who is perseverating on things or has a tendency to perseverate, then it is creating a strategy wherein you distract yourself, which then, doesn't, some of the study seems to be about building the ability to sort of not cement these ideas in your long-term memory, right? Something that might start as a minor umbrage with a situation or an action or whatever that turns into like long-term grievance.
Yeah, I love the idea of thoughts being a new sort of chemical reaction. Like if thoughts are fire and externalizing them is adding oxygen, then you're just emblazoning it even further. And the idea of like, actually what you should do is smother it. That doesn't mean share it with other people. That means like just get rid of it. Is kind of a wild image.
Yeah, this person who Nicholas Fabiano, MD, who like shares different journal articles and things like that online, talks about this idea. I'll read what he said. Like, these clinical views remain unreconciled with neurobiological evidence that suppressing thoughts helps maintain mental health. For example, engaging the right lateral prefrontal cortex to suppress intrusive thoughts is associated with greater resilience to developing PTSD, decreased anxiety about feared events, fewer distressing intrusions, and a tendency to forget suppressed content. Right.
It's the Ted Lasso, be a goldfish, just like let it pass through you and forget immediately.
Yeah. In this study, no paradoxical increases in fears occurred. Instead, suppression reduced memory for suppressed fears and rendered them less vivid and anxiety provoking.
I mean, it's so hard to have this conversation and not just have it all wrapped up in, the weird, like, culturally, like the cultural and sort of gender expectations of like, be in total control of your feelings. Like, don't let them own you. Like, you own them. And I don't know. I start wondering about, like, to avoid that from overtaking this whole thing, is there a certain type of thought, or like even in that, it describes them as intrusive thoughts, maybe the kind that you're ruminating on, that basically you're in a mental rut, right? Of like, this is a thing that I'm cycling and I can't get out of. I'm fixating on it. I'm wholly distracted by it. Like, is there a type of thought that this makes sense for, such that we don't then also need to make sort of the broader inference that like you should never express your emotion and you should like control all feeling, that feels like it's gone too far. But it seems like there's a specificity around this.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is like undesired thoughts, right? And I think I would probably, as not a clinical expert in these things, but I would probably distinguish, like, there are thoughts that you have that you don't like through a day, right? Confronting a situation where you're forced to receive a reality that like you need to reconcile in some capacity. But the idea that then that same thought continues to persist, right? Like, the idea of reconciling a growth opportunity is a healthy action. The idea of not being able to think about anything else in your life but this area which you need to grow in is unhealthy, right? And is like ultimately not productive in improving at that thing, right? Like, that's where the idea of like the yips come from in sports, where you're like so fixated on one problem that you stop being able to throw a baseball or shoot a free throw.
Yeah, right. There's clearly like some kinds of thoughts that like they start to be all consuming, and like the nature of the thought is like so big and inescapable. It also feels like another piece of thoughts like this, and not all thoughts, but maybe it's like thoughts that come from within, even when faced with external evidence to the contrary.
Yeah.
Like, even if someone else is saying like, no, or like if someone is behaving really measured, is expressing their feelings and thoughts calmly and clearly, but you are incapable of bringing yourself to that level, it's like, okay, now it's gone off the rails.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I am no longer in control, and it is my own self that is perseverating rather than other external factors, which I think is really importantly different from like, I don't like that idea, so I'm going to get rid of it and avoid it.
Right? Yeah. I mean, I think I also encountered this morning, someone talking about a Nietzsche quote, because a woman posted something online where she was like, I ran into she looked like she was in her maybe mid-late 50s. And she was like, I ran into these people that bullied me in 7th grade, and I found them and decided I was going to contact them and let them know how they made me feel when we were in 7th grade. And this person was like, this reminds me of this Nietzsche quote about like the power of forgetfulness, and that like a strong soul is one that can forget. And I tried to like go find some quickly before we started this conversation, but there's one quote, it looks like from Genealogy of Morals, that says, "Blessed are the forgetful, for they get the better even of their blunders." And this idea of like not being stuck in these issues of things that you would rather forget, like that we will all make mistakes, that we will get some things wrong, whether you are forgiving yourself or you are forgiving someone else, right? The idea of just like letting it go. And the power of that is really interesting insofar as what this study is saying is like people feel happier if they are able to like forget things that they don't want to think about. But a lot of sort of folk wisdom and clinical wisdom is oriented today around the need to talk it out and externalize a lot of these things, and making the idea of forgetting sort of maybe not malevolent, but certainly sort of like slothful with your mental health.
Right. It's like in this universe where you're the only one who's thinking this, right? It's different if both sides, again, like if there's an external party that is actively being influenced by this thing, it changes the dynamic completely, because that actually could create resolution between longtime rivals, or, like a feud that's gone on. Like you could, by externalizing, you could bring closure, you could sort of create greater understanding between the two of you. However, again, I think this whole thing rests on the premise that it is entirely a creation of your own and exists in the closed system of your own head. And in that world, you're actually, by externalizing it, you are creating a new thing that wasn't there for the other person, right? It's like, why do you bring that up? Like they've moved on, but like you clearly haven't moved on. You could create a closure within your own internal closed system by smothering the thought and letting it go. But again, like I feel, I don't know, it's interesting. I'm noticing like, I'm so like, even I am so averse to being like, this is a good idea, because there are other contexts, our whole culture moving towards like, trying to communicate better when it affects other people, trying to remember our history when it affects our present. But if it's all just up there, I don't know. It's like, how do you then gauge, like how do you have a lucid understanding or awareness of whether it's all up here or it's actually a thing that affects the world? Like you could completely conjure in your own mind that it is not just about you and it's affecting other people.
Yeah. I mean, I think, there's multiple contexts to like think about this, and which you're alluding to. There's sort of the personal, right? Of I'm having a thought that I don't want persistently, right? Some anxious thought maybe, or negative self-talk or whatever it is. And the question becomes like, are you getting anything from it? Like, is it at some point you will begin to recognize for yourself, like, oh, I don't want this here.
Right.
And the wisdom is sort of like general conversational wisdom is like, let's talk about it. Why do you feel that way? Like, let's dig deeper into it to get to some sort of reason why that was there and hold that in a continuous fashion. And so then you are sort of perpetually needing to carry the weight of history for why you're feeling that thing to move forward into the future, which feels like a lot. If you think about it in sort of like a relational dynamic, the question then is like, to maintain a relationship in the future, you have to carry the weight of every instance of umbrage in the past on both sides of that relationship in order for it to go forward, which also, right, like seems very difficult. And there are, if you go back to historical wisdom in religions or philosophical texts or whatever it is, right, like the idea, like I grew up in like the Catholic Church, that like turn the other cheek. The idea of like if someone slaps you in the face, like turn the other cheek. The idea of like just forgive and like move forward, and to like let those things, like not carry those things with you in the future, is sort of interesting. Like that wisdom was oriented in one way that is different from sort of contemporary cultural wisdom, and maybe there needs to be some reconciliation in that.
You're like, wow, it's just the preeminence of
Yeah,
Christian ideology.
Yes, the kingdom. I mean, I think like most ideologies have. I mean, the alternative, right, is like eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, like carry out equivalent justice, but then move on, right? Like but there, it feels like that idea is not necessarily new, but maybe fell out of fashion for a period. And it's interesting for it to come through science being like, actually, like it turns out maybe just don't think about it.
Hard, because both of those examples still exist in a world where it may indeed exist beyond that personal locus. Like it might be two parties feuding for good reason. Now what? Right. So like that I think is different. In fact, maybe a closer example that I thought of that is non-secular is like maybe closer to like Marie Kondo's magic of tidying up sphere of like, it is on the scale of you and what affects you and your own thoughts of like how messy your living space is. And maybe it could affect other people, but largely it really is about you. And that whole process of like thanking a thing that served its purpose, but then saying goodbye to it as it no longer serves its purpose, and also makes room for a different, fresh feeling of like, I can see the things that I do want to keep around. The way I imagine this relates is that with your own thoughts, like the sort of higher, I don't know, the sort of superior echelon of being able to take a look at your own thoughts that largely are in all the drawers of your own head that are affecting you and that you need to be navigating around. Like, how often do we take stock of those things and we're like, I'm good, actually. I'm just going to let that go. It's instead, it sort of is rarely, it's more typically sort of part of the autonomous process. Like I'm thinking, if y'all have seen Inside Out, where at the end of the day, they're like, all right, sending this to long term. And like all of the little marbles like roll out. So I feel like it's sort of like that, where your thoughts just end up like, maybe you'll just forget it in time. But it's more interesting to think about like all the things that we've clung to because it meant something, a t-shirt that like meant something. Like at what point do we actively decide what to send and not just let sort of the raging autonomous system take over and decide for us?
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting of like you're using like totems as a facsimile for memory because you're unsure. You are ascribing value to a memory in a moment, but unsure whether you will naturally be able to get back to that moment. And so you maintain a totem as a mechanism for getting back there.
Yes.
A t-shirt, a concert ticket,
right.
A photo, whatever.
The emotional version of that is a slight that now has ballooned into like my whole perception of a person. Yeah.
And not just, I think where the issue comes in sort of the maintenance of these memories of grievance or of negative thoughts is that our orientation to it now is not just the sort of wringing out of justice with that individual, but this idea when we talk about like past trauma is that every future relationship will need to carry the burden of those past experiences that another person created, right? You have a relationship. We can all relate to that. I can relate to that personally. Like you have something that negative happens in a past relationship, and then the expectation is that a future relationship that is healthier and better for you also must carry the burden of your sensitivities to, past experience.
Yeah,
right?
The image we all use is baggage, right?
Yeah.
Like that's why we call it. It's like you've packed You've literally
Yeah.
packed all these t-shirts, totems, what have you, into these suitcases. Yeah.
But there's an orientation, I think, a cultural orientation potentially today that is saying like, honor your baggage, fill the caboose, like bring, 3 carry-ons,
right.
whatever. Like
love me as I am.
Yeah, free check baggage. but what this study is seeming to suggest is like actually like
maybe
travel
don't.
light.
Yeah. Just like 2 pairs of pants and a shirt is good.
Yeah, like you can
opposite.
you if it seems to suggest like your brain has the power to forget through strategies, and if you force you help your brain to forget, like turns out you're happier, and you're like, like I don't know, I just don't feel like we are having a conversation about like, yeah, maybe you should just forget it. Like if your friend comes to you and is just like, I just got in this big fight with my partner and I'm so mad at them, and you're like,
what if we play Mario Kart? I don't know. Yeah. Like, what if we do something other than that?
Yeah,
actually?
Maybe you should not think about it. And like,
especially if it's case closed. If it's case closed, like the instinct to vent, it sounds like is maybe give yourself peace by playing Mario Kart.
Yeah.
What if instead we did this and didn't do that?
Yeah. I've had conversations with my mom where I'm like, hey, we've had this conversation. I think we talked, and I'm just like, maybe let's shut it down.
Let's call it.
Yeah.
I think we call it. What do you think?
5 minutes is good. We got it. And like, to be fair, like those conversations have stopped. And I think she's like forgotten. It is interesting to think about like, does one have a natural tendency for those things? Like, are you a rememberer? Right.
Oh, yeah.
Like I'm definitely a forgetter. Like, not of people's names or like important things, maybe like their relationships, or like I can remember that, but like I don't remember what I ate or where I went or what we did the last time of this thing. Like I forget my own life.
Whoa. For another day. It's interesting though, because there's probably like the innate your makeup and how your brain works version of that. There's also, like we've already said, the cultural version of like, remember the things, not just the bad things. It probably comes with also remembering the good things and having that stick with you. But, again, to the extent that it is serving you and exists in your own head, maybe that's a different context.
Yeah, just got to move on. Well, Jess, can you bring us to our forgive and forget corner?
You set out with this provocation that maybe our whole cultural expectation and shift towards having people release, share, externalize all the things that are in their head is sort of flatly a good thing. And the provocation here being, where are the limits of that thing? Does it need to be maybe not all the time? Are there ways in which that actually is proving a disservice to us, where in our own minds we might be the only ones thinking about, worrying about an intrusive thought or idea that's ultimately like making us the loser. And it's just an interesting thing that challenges so much of what we know and assume to think like, I don't know, maybe I don't even remember. I don't even know. Moving on.
We shouldn't talk about it.
We shouldn't talk about it. Let's not.
Critical Nonsense is a Sylvain production.
Brought to you by... where did I put that?
As always, we'd like to thank our executive producer and goldfish, Jess Vander.
You're welcome. We'd also like to thank sound engineer and the totem of our hearts, Alex Contel. Do I use that too much? Sorry.
We'd like to thank our programming coordinator and elephant, Les Jacobs.
And thanks to our production crew and the always knowing the things. Sorry, Gilbert, Nora Mesrich, Christy Jensen, Amanda Medina, and Amy Waters.
And as always, thanks, Len.
Thanks.
Special thanks. Scrapbooks. I don't have any, but
Wow. Just think of all the effort.
Just put your
that
totems
goes
in a place.
Put them there and then leave it be. You know what else? Maybe don't talk about it, but music is good and writing is good. If you put it in art form, maybe that's okay.
Expel. Catharsis. Special thanks to Catharsis.
Special thanks to Catharsis, the word and the emotion.
Yeah. Just get it out.
Okay, cool. This is great. Thanks so
Love
much.
you,
Bye.
Mina. Bye.